Hello. Okay. Okay. So today we are going to be talking about the SOHCAHTOA thing again. So we're going to be talking. Yesterday we talked about tangent. So that started with a T. Today we're going to be talking about sine and cosine. So sine starts with S, cosine starts with C. So maybe you're seeing where those things are going to be. So remember, tangent is equal to opposite over adjacent. Cosine is going to be equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. Sine is going to be equal to opposite over hypotenuse. So this thing will really help you remember all of these trig functions, because if you don't use this, it's going to be really hard to remember. So again, sine is the opposite. So I like to just write it like this. Sine of something equals opposite over hypotenuse. So for example 1, find sine of S and then sine of R. So sine of S, remember it's opposite over hypotenuse. So S is this angle right here. So what's the opposite side length? Well, that would be 63. The hypotenuse of this triangle, so that's opposite of the 90-degree angle, is 65. So 65 divided by 63. Oops, I did that backwards. 63 divided by 65 would be 0.9692. And then the sine of R. So if I'm looking at angle R, the opposite sine, or opposite side, is 16, and the hypotenuse would be 65. So 16 divided by 65 would be 0.2462. So remember, sine, opposite over hypotenuse. So example 2, this time we got to find cosine. So cosine of x is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. So if I look at angle x, the side that is adjacent, so remember, when it says adjacent, it's only talking about legs. So the adjacent side has to be attached to the 90-degree angle. So that would be 15 here. So 15 divided by the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is the opposite side of the 90-degree angle. So the hypotenuse would be 17. So 15 divided by 17 would be 0.8824. And then they want us to find the cosine of y. So cosine of y, remember cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So if I'm looking at angle y, the leg that is adjacent to angle y would be 8. And the hypotenuse is still 17. So 8 divided by 17 is equal to 0.4701, or 06, excuse me. All right, so now example 3. They want us to find a bunch of different things here. So sine of x is the first thing I'm going to find. So sine x is this angle. So if I'm finding the sine, remember sine is so opposite over hypotenuse. So if I'm looking at x, the opposite side would be 15. And the hypotenuse is 25. So 15 divided by 25 would be 0.6. Now sine y, so remember again, sine is so in the SOHCAHTOA, so is opposite over hypotenuse. So angle y is right here. So I'd be looking at the opposite side, so 20 divided by the hypotenuse, which is 25. So if I divide that, oh, I probably should have reduced this. So I'll reduce this first. This is 4 over 5, and that'd be 0.8. That as a reduced fraction would be 3 over 5. So moving on now, cosine of x. So again, I'm looking at angle x over here. So cosine is ka, so ka toa. So that's adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent side, the adjacent leg to angle x would be 20. The hypotenuse is 25. So that's 4 over 5 or 0.8. And then finally the cosine of y. So again, adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent side or adjacent leg to y would be 15. Hypotenuse is 25, so that'd be 3 over 5 or 0.6. So notice there's a couple patterns here. So when I take the sine of x, I get 0.6. But when I take the cosine of y, I also get 0.6. And then sine of y and cosine of x are both 0.8. That's because if you're using the adjacent side of angle x, that's also the opposite side of angle y. So sometimes you'll get the same answers using different trig functions. So moving on to the next page, you can skip this little story. My story's better. So example 4, we got to solve for x. So now it doesn't tell us what trig function to use. So we know we have an angle of 32, so we're going to be looking at that angle. So I have 32, and we're going to use one of the trig functions. We're going to use sine, cosine, or tangent. So we got to figure out which one we want to use. So what two sides have they given us here? So this is the hypotenuse. This is a leg. This is a leg. But if I'm looking at this angle, this leg is the opposite leg. This leg would be the adjacent leg. So I know they give us the opposite leg and the adjacent leg. So opposite over adjacent. And that's tangent. So that means I'm using tangent 32. And it's going to equal the opposite. So x over the adjacent divided by 10. So let me rewrite this so it doesn't look all weird. So tangent of 32 equals x over 10. So all I'm trying to do is solve for x. X is almost by itself, but right now x is being divided by 10. So the opposite of dividing by 10 will be multiplying by 10. But I got to do that on both sides. 10 divided by 10 is 1, so now I just have x on this side. So then whatever number is over here will be my answer. So I'm going to have to use my calculator because I'm sure none of you can do tangent of 32 in your head. I sure can't. So when I multiply 10 times the tangent of 32, I get 6.25. So x equals 6.25. In example 5, we got to solve for x. So again, first thing we want to do is analyze like which two sides they give us and which angle. So we're using this angle obviously. So we're going to have something of 51 equals something. So this side is opposite of the 90-degree angle, so that would make this the hypotenuse. This is a leg and this is a leg. So if the angle's right here, what leg would this be? It's touching this angle, so that means it's adjacent. This is the opposite leg because it doesn't touch angle 51. So they do not give us the opposite leg. They give us the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So what uses adjacent and hypotenuse, or what uses A and H? That would be cosine. Cosine of 51 is going to equal the adjacent. So 8 divided by the hypotenuse, which is x. So this time I'm trying to get x by itself, but if x is on the bottom of a fraction, I can't just do one step to get x by itself. But I do know that I can, if I just have cosine of 51 or any number here, I can divide it by 1 and it'll be the same thing. And then I can cross multiply. Because I have two fractions that are separated by equal sign. So 1 times 8 is 8. X times cosine of 51 will be on the other side. So now that I have x times cosine of 51, to get rid of cosine of 51, I just divide by cosine of 51 on both sides. Cosine of 51 divided by cosine of 51 is 1. So x is going to equal 8 divided by cosine of 51. So let's see, 8 divided by cosine of 51. So 12.71. Now our last example, we got to solve for x again. So we're using this angle, so 37. So we got to figure out which trig function we're going to use. So when I say trig function, I just mean sine, cosine, or tangent. There's more trig functions than that, but that's all we're using. So they give us these two sides. So this side right here is the hypotenuse because it's opposite of the 90-degree angle. Then they give us this leg. So these are the two legs. This leg right here is touching angle 37, so this is adjacent. This leg is not, so it's opposite. So they give us the opposite and the hypotenuse. So what uses O and H? That would be sine. So sine of 37 equals opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite is x, hypotenuse is 20. So if you wanted to, you can make this a fraction, cross multiply, but since we're just dividing x by 20, to get rid of that 20, all I have to do is multiply both sides by 20 and then x will be by itself. So 20 divided by 20 will be 1, so I'll be left with x. Let me move this down a little bit. So x, and then 20 times sine of 37. So sine of 37 times 20 should be 12.04. And that is it.